Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar on decarbonising road transport and strategies for zero-emission bus and road freight. This is one of a series of events we're delivering as part of BSI's Net Zero Week. My name is Nick Fleming, Head of Transport at BSI, and I'll be moderating today's webinar and panel session. So we've got what I'm sure will be a very interesting session lined up, but before I do that, I'm going to have to do the obligatory housekeeping and explain how this webinar is going to work and a little bit more about the platform. So, oops, done there. So the important thing here to state is this is a listen-only webinar. So you won't be able to unmute yourself, you won't be able to switch your cameras on, but we do want the session to feel interactive. So please, as we go through this session, submit any questions you have via the question button, which you'll should find to the top right hand side of your screen. You'll see a chat function, and then next to that a box with a question mark. So please leave your questions there. If you have any technical issues, you can also report them through the same button. After completing after the event finishes, we'll send around a survey, and it would be fantastic if you could complete that. Another thing to state is this is a CPD accredited webinar. If you want to request your certificate, you need to complete that survey. And finally, the QR code that we have here, if you scan that and go through to that link, you will find a list of other BSI events that will be running throughout the year. So without further ado then, I want to do a little bit of scene setting and outline how we want the session to work. So I'll get onto that shortly, but firstly, I just wanted to run through the agenda. So we're going to have Chris Ashley of RHA and Ian Dennis of Zenobi helping us to navigate the world of trucks, vans, and the big commercial vehicles. Each of Chris and Ian will give us 5 to 10 minutes to share their perspectives on where the sector is and its decarbonisation journey, talk about some of the critical technologies, considerations and priorities, what's working, what isn't working, what's more challenging, etc. Then what we're going to do is switch over to buses, and we'll hear from both Faizan Ahmed of First Bus and Marina Gareth-Fallu, and hear about some of the works being undertaken to bring electric buses to our roads. Again, there'll be a focus here on what's working, what's not working, success and progress, hopefully. But between us, we'll start to unpick some of these big challenges, what solutions are coming into the market, how are we going to make this transition away from petrol and diesel vehicles, fossil fuels to in a safe, sustainable way and at scale, which is part of the challenge here. So we're lucky to have all 4 speakers with us today. We'll then move into a Q&A around 10:45, and this is the opportunity to feed in your questions via the chat function. We've had a few questions pre-submitted already, which is fantastic, and we'll try and get to those and then some of the questions that we received live, aiming to wrap up by 11:30. So I'll just do a little bit of scene setting now, and hopefully that will tee us up for the session. Why today's topic? So we know that HGVs and vans, commercial vehicles, will play a really important role in decarbonising not only road transport, but all of transport. Those vehicles are responsible for roughly 1/3 of emissions that come from road transport, and as well as the kind of environmental impacts of that. There's obviously impacts on air quality in our cities and towns. Emissions from buses are, much lower, as the chart shows, and have been in decline. But buses will also play an absolutely critical role in decarbonising our transport system, particularly given the potential, their potential to support modal shift and, taking people out of cars into passenger transport. We do a lot of bus journeys in the UK, and nearly 3.6 billion in 2024. That's still lower than pre-COVID-19 levels. We're seeing a lot of electric buses on our roads, actually. And if you're lucky enough, like me, to live in a city where electric buses are now commonplace, so I'm in Norwich, but if you're living in Coventry, Oxford, or obviously London, you will be seeing electric buses. They'll be much more of a common sight, and the numbers up 35% from 2024 compared to 2023. We're also seeing some hydrogen fuel cell buses. Surrey, I know, has some hydrogen buses. So we are seeing that transition before our eyes. HGVs is moving a lot more slowly. So we've got some HGV models now coming into the market that are battery electric. We've also got some exciting demonstrators here in the UK via the ZHID program, which is trying to prove that technology and then bring that through and scale it up as part of the commercialization. Just on the ZHID program. Now, BSI has been involved in that, working on standards development, and I know many of you will be familiar and will have been involved in ZHID as part of a demonstrator or part of a trial project. That's been a really important piece of work for BSI, because in undertaking this work, we really focused on where could we help, where could we help the organisations involved in the demonstrators in terms of what are the challenges that without standards would be very difficult to overcome. And that led to the development of a number of BSI documents, guidance documents, looking at things like publicly accessible charging for electric HGVs, the design of hydrogen refueling stations, for instance, and also really interesting work looking at maintenance and inspection of HGVs and those facilities. So these are all things where, if we want to scale zero emission trucks, we need to be looking at those different areas: infrastructure, skills, and also the kind of good safety practices. During the ZHID program, I think one thing we became aware of as BSI was the potential for crossover between the bus and coach sector and HGVs, not just in terms of the potential to share things like infrastructure, but also the opportunities to share knowledge and to support knowledge transfer. Two different types of modes on this similar journey. What can be shared, what can be learned, and where are the opportunities for cooperation? And that's really what sits behind today's session. I just want to say a little bit more about where BSI fits in here. So we are the UK's national standards body. We represent the UK voice of the industry and consumers and wider stakeholders in the development of national standards, but also European and international standards. So we adopt those standards as British standards, and they're really important in terms of the whole harmonisation need to ensure that standardization is kind of fulfilling its promise around supporting trade, supporting competitive business, reducing costs and risks. And we have lots of technical committees, over 1,000, that span all the different areas that we'll be talking about today. Oops. And just to give an illustration really of the breadth of those standards, the standards that we work on cover all of the things that are involved in the ZEV transition, from the components, the batteries, to the infrastructure, and putting in place the relevant infrastructure, making that infrastructure interoperable, to the vehicle side and the operational safety, all the way through to those broader frameworks, governance frameworks that you might use for reporting emissions. We're involved in spearheading the development of ISO's first net zero standard, which is due to publish next year, and things like circular economy, which I know we all understand is becoming increasingly important in the broader sustainability discussion, particularly around batteries and things like materials. The last bit from me then, just a quick plug really for where you can find all those standards, and that's on BSI Knowledge. So this is our subscription service, and I've left the QR code in there. So all of the different standards, we've pulled out some of the EV charging ones here on the screen, but that's where you can access standards, the international standards, the European standards, and the British standards that I've mentioned. Okay, brilliant. So without any more delay then, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, and that's Chris Ashley from the Road Haulage Association. So Chris is a senior policy lead covering net zero at Road Haulage Association. The RHA is the only trade association in the UK dedicated to road haulage. Its members represent over 7,000 companies and over 100,000 commercial vehicles. And what we've asked Chris to do is provide a little bit of insight on where the road freight sector is in terms of its net zero transition, its own decarbonisation journey, and pull out some of those trends, some of the technology pathways that his members are exploring. And that I know that there's lots of great RHA research that's been done in the last few months that really starts to put this into black and white for us. So Chris, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Yes, hello everybody. My name is Chris Ashley, as Nick says, from the Road Haulage Association. And again, as Nick said, we're a trade body representing actually nearly 9,000 members now, operators across the country. And my role at the RHA is to lead on its net zero work. The way I always describe that is to answer the question for our members as to how we make the switch away from diesel vehicles to electric and or hydrogen vehicles of the future. And thank you, Nick, for the opportunity just to give you our perspective of how things are going. And I think I'd like to just introduce this session by saying that, there are definite green shoots now happening in the HGV decarbonisation space. Infrastructure to power electric HGVs is being installed, and we are now seeing electric trucks on our roads. But that's not to say that this is plain sailing. It's not. To give you some context, the latest figures I have from the SMMT is that there's about 700 registered electric trucks on UK roads right now, but that's out of an overall fleet of 500,000 in the UK. So clearly there's a long way to go. Now, you very kindly give me a platform just to sort of give an overview of where we are. And you alluded to some research that we did earlier this year, where we ran a survey amongst predominantly our membership, but it was open to all operators, to ask that question: how are you getting on with the decarbonisation journey? Now, on a positive, we found that just under a quarter of respondents, and we had just over 500 respondents to our survey, so that's quite a good response rate. Just under a quarter said that they either had an electric HGV in their fleet or planned to within the next 5 years. And we found that to be a very encouraging finding. However, the flip side to that is that the flip side to that equation, which was that 70% of those whom we surveyed said that they had no plans at this stage to introduce these vehicles. So we then followed up and we asked, okay, so what's stopping you from investing in electric or hydrogen vehicles in 2025? And there were some very clear nuggets that we got. We asked, we gave in our survey 6 barriers for respondents to rank, and from that we were able to kind of cut through some of the noise in terms of what are the issues. And what we found was that by far the biggest barrier was about vehicle performance, a perception that the available vehicles, electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles on the market, weren't capable of doing the job that an operator wants them to do. Now, that's a very interesting finding, and we have said in our subsequent report that we need to follow up on that to understand, is that a real concern or a perceived concern? And because clearly, the market for zero emission vehicles is still very nascent, so there may need to be some education, awareness campaigns as to what vehicles are capable of. That said, it is also understood, these vehicles are in their infancy, technology-wise. And so that's, of course, why the government's ZHID programme is so crucial. ZHID, if you're probably all familiar, is the Zero Emission HGV Infrastructure Demonstrator programme, which is designed to exactly address this concern about vehicle performance, where there will be electric and hydrogen trucks trialled on our roads. and the promise is the vehicle performance from these vehicles will be made available to the industry to help the operator understand what vehicles are capable of, so to help plan their investments. The other finding we found was a desire that technology options are kept open. And I'm duty bound to say that 12% of our members whom we surveyed wanted to bring a hydrogen powered vehicle into their fleets within the next 5 years. And this is a common piece of feedback. Now, hydrogen provokes a debate in our industry in terms of, of how it will progress. The common thinking at the moment is that it will help decarbonize the very hard to decarbonize use cases, such as at the heavy end of the industry, like if you're hauling aggregates or forestry, or very, very heavy haulage, the oversized loads that you see on our roads. But a clear message that the technology options needed to be kept open. So those are the findings. Our report is available on the website, and there's a lot of detail, insights in there, which I would encourage you to read. But those are the headline findings. But so what do we do about all of this? Well, very quickly in the sort of about 30 seconds I've got left, a very clear message that we want to convey at the RHA is where you can decarbonise, you should. And so that basically means understanding what the available vehicles are capable of, and understanding how that can decarbonise your operations. Now, it's horses for courses. Different operations will have different needs. At the risk of making sweeping statements, electric vehicles on the market are very good now for that sort of short to medium range journey. And so that perhaps fits into distribution trunking or urban delivery. And so it's understanding how that works. The final point I want to make, as well as that point of decarbonise where we can, is there's now a lot of support becoming available. At the moment, the government is running a depot charging scheme to help operators invest in electric chargers at their depots. I was minded that Richard Bruce from DFT spoke at Cenex Expo a couple of weeks ago now, and said that DFT saw this scheme as a pilot, potentially to unlock the £1.4 billion that's been set aside in the spending review to help HGV decarbonisation agenda. So, and we wait to see what the detail from that 1.4 billion looks like from DFT. But I just also want to commend the BSI for its work to develop standards. This is all part and parcel of this journey. It's very important that we understand how to operate these vehicles safely. And so the standards that the BSI have developed, which we're very delighted to have been involved in helping to develop, is another key component. It's all about getting that information out there now to help educate our sector, understand the opportunities, and as I say, to decarbonise where we can. So I hope that gives you a very high level and quick run through of the RHA perspective. Lots happening, as I say, green shoots definitely now emerging, but still some chunky issues to be overcome. Vehicle performance being one of them. The other one, which I haven't mentioned, of course, is cost. The cost of these vehicles for many of our operators remain out of reach, particularly the SMEs. So help support in order to generate the economies of scale that we need to see to bring down costs would be a key ask of the RHA going forwards. But I think, Nick, I'll leave it there and hand back to you.
Thank you, Chris. That's fantastic, and some as you say, there's some encouraging things there. The green shoots, and I like the way you phrased that. There's not necessarily a perfect, there's not necessarily a silver bullet at the moment, but it's about decarbonising where we can. And I know that seems to have been reflected in your members' research. And you mentioned hydrogen. What's your views on the kind of the other transition pathways that are there? Use of other fuels. Is there anything else that your members are telling you there?
Well, yes. So on hydrogen, I think it's accepted that the development of hydrogen is a little way behind the electric pathway. But we're very clear that hydrogen shouldn't be ruled out. Yes, there are well-known challenges in terms of the economics behind hydrogen and its efficiency. Equally, I'm minded to say there are challenges behind the electric route as well in terms of range. But we have to allow the technologies to develop to overcome those challenges, in our view. And as I say, the feedback I'm getting from the membership is that hydrogen will have that place for for that particularly hard to decarbonise those use cases, particularly the heavy end. I will make a plug also for low carbon fuels here. We think that should also remain in play, if nothing else, as a transition step. There is a risk here of perfection being the enemy of the good. Because if we all wait for that perfect solution to come along, well, we could be waiting for a very long time. And meantime, we're continuing to run diesel vehicles, which are contributing to the CO2 issue. So low carbon fuels, in our view, has a role. There's some policy issues we think the government should be looking at, because HVO, which is the classic low carbon fuel cited, is more expensive than diesel, and in a low margin industry such as ours, price matters. So our ask is that whilst obviously people are free to buy HVO, actually to encourage its uptake to reduce carbon emissions from our fleet, we would like to see a fuel duty rebate linked to emissions that would help bring down the price of low carbon fuels, again to help the fleets reduce their emissions, if nothing else, is that interim step whilst the electric and hydrogen technologies develop.
So yeah, a very pragmatic approach really that Chris overall. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic, Chris. I know you've got to leave us briefly, and hopefully you will re-emerge later in the Q&A. So we'll let you take your leave now. And thanks for being with us this morning so far. And hopefully we'll see you again.
Absolutely, you'll see me for the Q&A, definitely.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. So we'll stay with commercial vehicles and trucks, and now I'd like to move over to our second panelist today, which is Ian Dennis. Ian is the head of EV fleets at Zenobē, a UK company who specialise in fleet electrification and energy storage solutions. And Zenobē have been involved in helping to scale not only electric fleets here, but as far away as Australia as well. So Ian's going to run through some slides with us and provide a little bit of summary of Zenobē's work and focused in the truck and road freight sector, how they're helping with the transition to make clean power accessible and available. And I'll hand over to you now, Ian, and hopefully you're all ready to go, and I'll pick up with you again at the end of your presentation.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm grateful for Chris setting the scene this morning. And I'd like to really talk about how we scale fleets. I think we're all seeing that there's a variety of different opportunities to embrace electrification. And there are numerous trials going on, whether through Vitellis, whether through ZHID, whether through Project Jolt, where trucks are being trialed. But once trialed and once proven to be capable of the duty cycle aligned with that trial, then we need to look at how we're going to scale. So what I'd like to do this morning is give you a very quick overview of Zenobē, because I'm sure many of you won't have heard of us. I would hope that you all have, but I'm sure many of you haven't. So I'm going to give you a very quick whiz through on Zenobē, and then I'm going to talk about how we see the potential for moving forward on the electrification of fleets. So in terms of what we do, we started out in network infrastructure on grid scale batteries. We essentially support the national grid with battery power when it is needed. So we're storing electricity from wind and solar. We've gone live with another 300 megawatts recently in Scotland, again, to support the grid and to build on the grid. That's given us huge expertise in respect to batteries. We then have two other areas of business. One is portable batteries, where we second life batteries and we put them out on deployment once they've finished their primary cycle on trucks, buses, vans, etc., and we redeploy them. Another area that we're heavily involved with is the creation of our own software to increase and optimize the power charging cycle for vehicles. And that's essential where we want to get every single amp and kilowatt that we can out of a connection. My particular area is fleet electrification. Globally, we have over 2,000 heavy-duty vehicles, buses, coaches, and we'll crack 200 trucks this year globally in terms of what we've brought onto various different fleets and what we've financed. As a part of that, we've electrified over 120 depots globally. With some commercial vehicle depots currently in build. The majority of those are buses, but that's given us huge experience to draw upon about overcoming some of the challenges. And to pick up on what Chris was saying, the key challenges here are infrastructure and financing. How do we help SMEs all the way through to corporates embrace this technology and bring this technology onto fleet? May I have the next slide, please? So while we're going to the transition to the next slide, essentially this is a background on what Zenobē is doing and how we have grown in terms of electrification. We're fairly well established now. We've been going for 8 years and we've grown very successfully with the objective of being the #1 battery service provider to UK fleet and grid operators. And we're well on the way to that. We're bringing on more batteries, we're bringing on more vehicles, we're bringing on more depots. Next slide, please. As I said, this is going to be a very quick whiz through. I want to talk more about the industry than about Zenobē, but I think it's important to give you some background. Essentially, what we do is we design, finance, build, and operate battery service solutions. That's the network infrastructure side of things. That's the second life batteries, but most importantly, it's the fleet electrification. How do we help fleets to electrify? And I would pick up on something that Chris said about what can we electrify now? What can we do now? Out of a population of 500,000 trucks in the UK, roughly 700 are electric. But of course, there's an awful lot more vans that are now electric. That is well on its way to embracing electrification. And I think what we have to do is try and work out how do we scale that within HGVs? What are the right duty cycles do we look at? Do we look at 7.5 tons? Do we look at 12, 15, 18, all the way up to sort of 26? I think there are some problems with the bigger trucks, but they're not in respect of the trucks themselves. They're in respect of how do we recharge them quickly enough. The truck technology is now pretty good. I think in terms of moving product, if you're looking at high volume low density, that's a given. If you're looking at those higher density loads, yes, we have to look at what is the acceptable range, but of course we are limited by drivers' hours. And I think in terms of what the OEMs have done in bringing units to market, they're capable of doing the job now, but what we need to do is to have the infrastructure to support it. Next slide, please. And that infrastructure is one of the areas where we're seeking to develop and to move forward. So here are 2 examples of projects that we've been successfully involved with. The top is a shared charging hub that's in Australia with numerous trucks and battery energy storage solutions, but that's available not only to the key operator, but also to other companies that subscribe to that particular site. And we've been very successful in the EV mixer side of things. The construction sector is moving ahead with electrification quite rapidly. And of course, that's being driven by customers as well, in that if you look at projects like the Lower Thames Crossing, they have to electrify. They have to be zero emission by 2027. So they're exploring the options and looking at what needs to come through. And of course, it's representative of what's happening in the market as well, where Chinese manufacturers are steadily bringing out more and more products that's coming to market that represents good solid solutions. They just need the infrastructure and the support behind it. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I think where we're aiming to take this business is to take the sector is to this sort of arrangement. This is China in January. I was at the Yutong factory, line upon line upon line of 7.5 ton trucks ready to go out to market. They have a very different model there. And I think this is one of the areas that the sector needs to explore, where they have a shared charging hub. This is government provided at 5p a kilowatt, so incredible pricing for electricity, but it makes it very, very easy for the operators to take their truck, power up for the day, and these are typically owner operated and they're out on dual shifts, so they are charged up again and then go and do the night shift, typically delivering lightweight cargo and the like to various different restaurants throughout Beijing. Next slide, please. just while we transition, Chris mentioned his report, the RHA report, and I wanted to draw some attention to this. 2030 and 2035 being sort of the key prerequisites. I know we have slightly longer for HGVs, but if we look at where the electric van market is going, then it's steadily climbing. Electric HGVs do lag behind that, but again, we're seeing 31% by 2035. And this is what we need to look at. How do we scale there? What are the important things? Next slide, please. And I think here what we have to look at is those two key areas. This is the percentage numbers that Chris was referring to. I have plagiarized his report completely, but it gives you some idea of what's happening in terms of electric HGVs, low carbon fuels, and hydrogen. I'm not going to talk about hydrogen. That's not my area. I don't want to get pulled into that today. I think it's more important to look at what we're doing about electrification. If I could have the next slide, please. And what we're going to look at is how do we look at these recommendations that came out of the RHA, and they typically revolve around government support, around looking at how do we decarbonize, and then how do we get phase out dates for diesels actually crystallize. And the two key areas that I want to talk about, infrastructure and financing. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I'm whizzing through these to get to the content. I'm conscious that we have a limited time available today. So in terms of financing, what is essential is that we cover off the charging infrastructure that is needed at the depot. As we seek to charge bigger and bigger batteries, you look at the Mercedes, for example, or the Volvo, they're both running 600 kilowatt hour batteries. Those are very sizable batteries. They need to be recharged. They need to be recharged quickly so that the trucks can get back up on the road. If we compare and contrast that with the bus sector, you might have had 10 hours where the buses are in depot and they can recharge. We're going to have very short dwell times for commercial vehicles. We need to get them out. This is where the depot-based model excels, though, that we know those vehicles are returning. We know that we have a charging window, however small that is for some of the larger HGVs. For the smaller ones, then we can look at overnight charging. Vans, 7.5 tonners, even all the way up to 18 tonners. If they're returning to depot, they can be charged overnight. And we can look at software to manage that and to ensure that it's efficient as possible. From the point of view of the vehicles, then clearly one of the key things that we keep hearing coming back is residual values. From our own point of view at Zenobē, we take residual values on trucks, but we're essentially taking a residual value on the battery and looking at the battery as a managed service, so that in the event that that battery's capacity reduces, we're able to then replace that battery and give the vehicle a longer life whilst redeploying for second life as well. All of this is essential. To be able to look at how we plan out depots. We have to be able to analyze the routes to make sure that it's the right duty cycle, to make sure that we have the right charging model. We look at site design, electrical infrastructure, and energy supply. That energy supply is critical. Many operators won't have had to have the circumstances where they have to have considerable power coming into site. They may have had 250, 450 kVA, but now we're talking about bringing in 1-2 megawatts of power. And there is a substantial backlog in the grid. What companies like Zenobē are trying to do is to work out how do we speed that process up? How do we navigate through the various different DNOs and bring that power to site quickly and efficiently so that vehicles can be charged? We know that the vehicles are capable of doing the duty cycles. Now we need to make sure that they can be charged effectively. Operationally, we need to make sure that obviously, we don't exceed the grid limit. We work within the grid limit, that we monitor and support the operations of the fleet, and that ultimately we give a performance guarantee so that we maintain those vehicles and they have uptime. Next slide, please. And just while that's cycling. So those are sort of the key areas, I think, in terms of how we plan different things. We have depot layout considerations, parking strategies, smart charging operation, as I spoke about, and then looking at the scheduling for when batteries need to be charged. And what we must recognize is that the battery is the core component here. That's what's providing the motive power. That's essentially where the residual value is derived from. And that's how we look at extending the life of that battery and maintaining that battery whilst making sure that the vehicle gets the maximum operational efficiency. Last slide. Next slide, please, sorry. There's a delay on this, isn't there? There we go. So in terms of maximizing power on all sites, as I've said, what we want to try and do is look at the power generation that's coming in. There's a lot of interest in microgrids at the moment, being able to use solar to support offices and depots, not necessarily for getting enough power to power trucks. We can take that from the grid, but to be able to use effective grid supply and battery storage where required to take advantage of cheap tariffs to ultimately fuel those vehicles. And I think this is the essential thing that we have to concentrate on now. How do we build the infrastructure for depot-based charging solutions? How do we make that available not only for the operator, but also for third parties as well? And I think that's one of the key areas that companies like Zenobē have to focus on, whilst at the same time providing the finance to various different operators to make these vehicles operational at parity compared to diesel. We touched briefly in the first presentation by Chris on alternative fuels. I think if you're looking at HVO, you need to be considering whether it's a more viable proposition to actually move over to electric and take an electric solution for the right duty cycle, rather than taking a transition fuel and start making that move now. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. Really interesting to hear battery management and that battery management as a service, and there's the whole kind of circularity, getting batteries back into operation feels very critical to some of the work you're doing at the moment, and those kind of emerging operating models. I was interested in, you talked a little bit about China and the work there and your work in Australia. Is there anything you're seeing in, globally that's really working in certain regions that you could point to, either in terms of kind of, could be a policy lever, could be operating models? Is there anything you think the UK could be looking to say, this is what we need to do?
I think when we look at China, we must appreciate that it's a state-based system and that it's got year-on-year growth of over 7.5%. If I go to China and look around, every vehicle is electric. There's a huge push there. Where we've been successful in Australia is on these shared charging models to look at building depots, and I think we're going to see a greater propensity for that throughout the UK. If you look at SMEs, you look at Chris's numerous operators, they don't all want to be building charging infrastructure in their depot. So can we get consortium together? Can we get arrangements together where we're going to share charging infrastructure? You have one key customer that will provide the site, but then make it accessible to other operators as well. And I'm sure this is what we're going to talk about in the bus sector at the moment, where it's happening with access to third-party charging opportunities.
And just a very quick one for you that's come in through the chat around HVO, and that being mentioned as a potential interim solution for HGVs. Are there any, besides the higher cost compared to diesel, do you see any other downsides to using the fuel whilst we wait for kind of EV battery range to increase?
For the right duty cycle, we should just make the jump and electrify. If we can make the cost structure work, and that's what's imperative, we have to be at parity. But you're already paying a premium for HVO. You're likely to pay a bigger premium now because of tariffs. Start looking at electrification. Start looking at what can be done to move that and change that over. It's not a perfect world. I'm not going to be naive and say we can electrify everything, because we can't. But there are certain duty cycles where absolutely we can. And if we are taking the right pricing model and extending how long those vehicles are on fleet, we're getting to parity against HVO. So you have to make the move at some time. You might as well make the move now and be a market leader and adopt this technology and start learning from it.
That's really clear. Thanks so much, Ian. I know you're going to rejoin us for the Q&A in about half an hour, so please stick around for that. And yeah, thank you for that. And we're going to switch our attention now to buses, and I'd like to invite Faizan Ahmed from First Bus to join us. Faizan is Decarbonization Program Director at First Bus. First Bus operates buses across the UK with a fleet of over 6,000 buses and moves more than 1.5 million passengers a day. I'm sure if any of that's wrong, Faizan's going to tell me, but Faizan, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and yeah, very happy to be here. Really enjoyed listening to both Chris and Ian earlier as well. So I normally do have slides with pictures, but I thought for a change for once, I think I'm more than happy to just speak a little bit more about First Bus's journey, in particular in regards to our net zero ambitions. So I think as we've already heard in the introduction, where are we at First Bus? So it's been quite a journey. I think 2 years ago, in terms of electrification, we had 200 EVs across 4 depots. That was back in 2022. And since then, now we're at 1,200 EVs across 15 plus depots. And now we've got a confirmed trajectory to get to over 1,500 zero emission vehicles by the end of next year. So it's been a tremendous growth trajectory in a very, very short period of time. And I think if the topic over here is challenges and strategies, then there are so many ways we can take that topic over here. But I think just building up on Chris's and Ian's earlier presentation and maybe filling in some of the gaps in what we've heard, I think if there's one aspect I think we shouldn't really forget over here is everything to do with change management. And I'd just like to bring to life some real stories over here. So yes, it's a transition. Normally you talk about the vehicles, the infrastructure, and the finance. But where my head is at is speaking to our engineering managers and hearing them talk about their on-site supervisors and engineers who spent a lifetime maintaining diesel vehicles. And then all of a sudden now they've got these new shiny electric vehicles. And there's this visceral sense of withdrawal sometimes, and which you really have to kind of manage very carefully as well. So, I mean, literally, I think an engineering manager once told me that one of his on-site engineers, they just stood around looking a little bit confused, even though they'd been through all of the training, because the training at some point is a little bit mechanical, right? But so there's that. I mean, so let's just not forget about all of the people impacted over here, whether it's engineers and all of the drivers, potentially whether it is trucks or buses who have to be retrained. And let's face it, it's a different drivetrain as well, right? And so for those of us who drive EVs, we do know that it is fundamentally a little bit different. It does pick up differently. And so those are all of the slightly softer things, which I just really emphasize everyone over here. If you're thinking about lessons learned, please don't forget about everything to do with change management beyond all of the tech over here as well. And then in the same vein for change management, I would say beyond engineers and drivers and customers, your organization, if you are going through a transition, that would also have to potentially change a little bit as well. So like for instance, in the bus sector, we've got a networks team who would be looking at schedules and driver duties. Then you've got an operations team who would be managing operations on the road. Then you've got the engineering team and the fleet management team who are primarily in charge of vehicles. So back in the diesel world, all of these different functions, they won't really be talking to each other. But as you transition to electric and potentially with an overnight depot charging model, all of a sudden, all of these functions need to collaborate a little bit more. And so if you are in the audience over here as managing this transition, so I would just encourage you to also think about all of the organizational changes which you're going to have to face as well, and just make sure that you've got a plan for that as well. So I think to Ian's point, I think I just wanted to share maybe 3 or 4 lessons, and then we'll pick the rest up in Q&A. So we've talked about change management. In terms of finance, so yeah, picking up on Ian's point there as well, and finance is critical as well. And I think thinking about the bus industry, and so for those of you who are a little bit more familiar, I think the overall bus industry has benefited from government funding via the ZEBRA program. So that is zero emission buses for regional areas, I believe, which covers up to 75% of the differential between diesel and EVs. I think if there is a lesson which we can take from that for everyone's benefit is that it has worked. We do have, I think, close to maybe 4,000 zero emission buses now on the road out of a fleet of perhaps 40,000 across the UK. And a great portion of that are thanks to the ZEBRA program. But I do think it's not necessarily, and this is our feedback to the government as well. I think in some instances, yes, there is government support required, but we can speak openly and honestly as a bus operator as well, is that we don't necessarily think that a pure CapEx grant is the best way, because you might say that's all going to the bus operator, but in reality, and there may be OEMs on the call over here as well. In reality, there is an honest question into to what extent are subsidies actually distorting true market prices. And so while there is government support required, and I think Chris alluded to this earlier as well in terms of looking at different ways to support this in terms of reduction in duties, I think a key lesson would be maybe it's not that upfront grant, maybe it is also something perhaps along the more of an OPEX focused finance grant may be a better option, if that's one lesson which I think the freight can take from the bus industry, because we do feel that the upfront grant isn't necessarily the only and the best option for finance in terms of government support. Then in terms of another lesson, then I would say, and maybe we will touch on this in more detail, I think First Bus is, I'm very proud to say, a pioneer in the whole shared charging infrastructure space. This has been something we've been doing since 2022. And just earlier this year, even though we've been doing it since 2022, we officially launched it under the First Charge brand, whereby we've got 15 plus depots. And I'm very happy to say we're already serving many of Chris's EHGV customers as well. We've got, small SMEs already using our infrastructure to charge up their EHGVs. We've got the likes of Welsh Trucks. We've also got Blakemore. And we've also got quite a few van fleets already making use of our infrastructure as well. So I do think that is definitely an area where we're more than happy to show some further thought leadership and share exactly how it works, because I don't think it should just be First Bus who's sharing our infrastructure. It should be other bus companies. And dare I say, as more and more truck companies also do electrify, and of course, while we would like them to be using our depot infrastructure, we do see this as just something which is good for the industry. And so more than happy to share. And we are already sharing quite a bit of knowledge and know-how across the truck industry space as well. And we presented at the ZHIT forums. And so if there is one kind of introspective lesson from the last couple of years, I will say is that, there shouldn't be a not invented here syndrome at all, because I think there's lessons I can also take when I've attended a few of the EHGV summits here or there of, oh yeah, we should actually, adopt that aspect or a particular way they've analyzed data, and I've taken it to our data and analytics team. And in the same way, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I think the bus industry can learn from passenger cars and vans, and then I think that the truck industry can definitely learn just beyond shared charging infrastructure, how potentially we've dealt with power upgrades or how potentially we've dealt with fire risks. And of course, that is, of course, where BSI can play a leading role as well. And then if there's one last lesson I would share is, I think every challenge is potentially an opportunity in disguise as well. And so building on what Ian's also just referenced, I think I would encourage folks not to just try to replace a diesel business model with a zero emission vehicle EV business model whenever they're thinking about the transition. So from our perspective, as First, we're exploring battery storage technology. We've got pilots running in, we've got in our Portsmouth depot and in Aberdeen as well. Then from our perspective, we've also taken a position in the residual value of the battery as well. So we do have an ownership position in quite a lot of our bus batteries, because we kind of see this wonderful world where we're going to take really good care of that battery. We've got all of the monitoring. And then we also, just like Ian and Zenobia have offered, we see a world where we'd be then reusing those batteries as potentially just grid storage at our own depots. And so it's just this nice virtuous circle. So things like these and opportunities like these are what I would just encourage everyone to really open your mind about. And it shouldn't just really be replacing a diesel vehicle, whether it's a truck or a bus, with an EV vehicle, because there's so much more you can do if you open your mind up to it. And it just really helps the overall total cost of ownership piece as well. So yeah, I thought I'd just highlight maybe 3 or 4 aspects up front, and then yeah, Nick, happy to pick up everything else in the Q&A.
Fantastic, thank you, Faizan. And actually, we did have a question coming in around TCO, effectively around, given the operating costs of EVs potentially being lower than ICEs, does the capital cost matter that much? And I guess for you, you've kind of responded to that, but that may be one we can pick up in the Q&A, because I think a lot of that modelling has been going on, I know, in the bus sector and the road freight sector. I think you made a couple of really important points as well around the sharing is already happening, as you said. That is starting to happen, and actually the piece around change management, I think it's often easy to perhaps get stuck on the very technical things, the technical challenges, but actually the operational piece is just as important, isn't it, from what you're saying? But on the technical side, are there any things there that you've particularly seen where you do feel that just thinking about standards, for instance, where you could see a lack of standardization at this stage that could be a priority going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And firstly, I do realize I'm looking very dark. I don't know what's happened. Normally it works very well, especially when I get sunlight, but hopefully folks can see me. I think in terms of standards, so very, very technically as well, you've got lots of new digital assets when you're looking at electrification. You've got the charging infrastructure, you've potentially got telematics on your vehicle, you've got the actual vehicle, and then you've got software which should be controlling all of this. So what tends to happen, and I mean, I think consultants can make a lot of money over here as well, is whenever you change one aspect, all of a sudden you have to do tons and tons of interoperability testing as well, because every aspect of that digital system talks in a different protocol to the others, and then you have to run through a series of tests as well. So I think there are already standards out there in the bus industry, but they're not, for instance, for preheating your vehicle in cold weather using the charging infrastructure. But to the extent they're very well adopted, or that they're not really bought in across the board, I do think that's definitely an area for exploration. And then the other one, which I'm sure you're already on top of, is that there is no national fire standard or policy for depots right now. Obviously, it's an area we take very, very seriously. But at present, it entails every time we're in a new depot or electrifying a new depot, it's a new consultation with the local fire station and perhaps a new series of requirements. And yes, obviously we engage and we consult with them, but if there was just one standard which everyone adopted for this is how you design the depot and make sure it's meeting all of your health and safety requirements, I do think that would go a long way in, well, easing the transition process.
No, thank you, Faizan. And I know that's a topic that our next speaker, Marina, is also passionate about. So we'll see you shortly for the Q&A, Faizan, and thank you for that. And I'll pass over now to Marina, who is TfL's Zero Emission Bus Development Manager. As of 2025, TfL operates over 8,700 buses throughout the city. How many of these are already electric? I suspect we might find out shortly. But Marina, over to you, and you're going to tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the progress that's being made in terms of deploying electric buses in a mega city. So we're looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Nick. And hi, everyone. I'm Marina Garifalou. Thanks for the kind introduction, and also great to hear from our previous speakers around the commonalities that we share, the challenges, but I wanted to grab the last point that Faizan made, that there is also quite a lot of opportunity out there. So we do have lots of challenges, but we also do have quite a lot of opportunities, just to shift this in a bit more optimistic note. So just to set the background, the current situation as it is that we run more than almost 9,000 buses across the network from 78 different bus garages, approximately 660 routes, quite a big network. And we do that by collaborating with our 7 bus operators. First Bus is one of those, and Faizan, and we are working very closely with 7 bus manufacturers to do so. The reason that we're working very closely with the manufacturers as well is that we're very, very invested on ensuring that the bus network we run with safety and customer features at its forefront. And now, over the last several years, we have added, of course, our goals for zero emission and decarbonization. So to do so, we have published a bus action plan in 2022, where we have all the aspects that we want to focus in order to make journeys within London zero emission, zero carbon, most customer friendly, improved journey times. I won't focus on that now, but all of the aspects that we have there. Now, more focused, hopefully that worked, more focused on our discussion today. We do have the pride to run the largest fleet of zero-emission buses in the Western Europe. We currently have over 2,000 zero-emission buses. That's more than 25% of our fleet. And we have approximately 1,500 new zero-emission buses on order amongst our operators. That is something that I think it's quite important to mention, is that since 2023, new buses can only be zero emission that join the fleets, and I think that sets the tone across London. We currently have across our operators 49 bus garages that have some form of power connections, and I'm mentioning some form because that's one of the big challenges I'm going to be focusing in a bit. And we're working, as I mentioned before, very close with the market to produce zero-emission vehicles to meet our requirements, whilst ensuring safety is still the primary focus, and any other customer features that we think very important to be there. But there is always a bit back there. So our ambition was to be 100% zero emission by 2037. Now that has been pushed forwards. It is now being zero emission by 2034, and there is a potential to accelerate that even further to 2030. Of course, with the additional funding that would need. That means that we still have more than 6,000 buses to convert and full power upgrades needed at all the garages. Okay, that moved forward. So I won't focus very much on this slide. I just wanted to set and introduce a bit the contracting principles that we're working with, just to set an understanding of what is expectation of actually us as TfL in comparison to what is expectation from the bus operators, because as Faizan will very rightly say so, the operators are the ones responsible for the vehicles, for securing power to the garages, training, all the operational management, but we are there sitting next to them in assisting them and trying to find ways supporting, bringing power to the garages, understanding the power market, supporting with any type of features that we think are essential for the vehicles, working very closely with the manufacturers. So it's a very, very close relationship, but everyone does have different responsibilities on that. I think, yeah, changing the slides, if we can go to the previous slide, please. So yeah, I don't know why the control is not working for me, but let's see. Yes, perfect. So coming on to challenges, as we mentioned before, so I will focus in a couple of those. There are several, of course there are. We are trying to completely shift an operational and technical model across the whole London, and of course there would be challenges and lots of things to learn from. So as I did mention before, power availability and capacity seems to be one of the main ones. Every bus garage is located in different areas of London, and others seem to be nearer to the existing DNOs, distribution network operator substations. Others seem to be not very near enough, and that's driving the access to the power and also potentially their costs. The lengthiest the route, the more expensive it gets. So it's one of the areas we're focusing quite a lot and trying to mitigate. Another emerging challenge that's quite crucial for us and for the operators has to do with the depot capacity. Now, every bus garage is quite a very tight working area, and by introducing new infrastructure in place, we are taking space out from critical operations happening there, and potentially from the full amount of buses that could be deployed. So we do have competing priorities there with the available capacity of the bus garages and the electrification or the new fuels that need to be installed. And just to make that a bit more interesting, we all know that the space availability across London is something that everyone is fighting for. So it's not very easy to just procure and go to a new bus garage or get new space to expand the existing ones. And I'm trying to say that on a light tone, but I'm sure that Faizan would be backing that up quite heavily. And as again mentioned before, fire safety seems to be one of the emerging risks that we're mainly focusing at the moment. We definitely see the role of standards being central there. So I'm sure that will be one of the discussions that will follow up later on the discussion. But what we need is central government and local government to set the tone, set standards, set the space. So as Faizan said, you have a new bus garage that you want to make zero emission. How do you do that? Let's make that clear and sound. We're working very closely with London Fire Brigade for London, and of course with the DFT to better navigate this challenge, but there is still work to be done there. Now, I won't go in all the details there, but there are several, these are the main challenges that we're focusing at the moment. We do have separate work streams internally within Transport for London looking at this and understanding and working very closely with operators and the manufacturers to better support them. And on that note, I will move to my next slide. Yes, that worked. Saying how do we embrace innovation? How do we support this journey further? We focused over the last few years on some of the most challenging routes on our network, understanding what happens to routes that their average daily mileage is more than 140 miles, or maybe in bus garages that are not near substations, as I mentioned before. So we currently have 2 trials running on, both with TfL support, especially in the infrastructure. Sorry, I got 2. Yes. So the first one is opportunity charging, which is operating since last year in one of the lengthiest routes across our network between Orpington and Crystal Palace. The distance between the 2 bus garages is more than 15 miles, which means that if the buses had to go back and forth to the garage to plug in and top up the energy, they would have lots of mileage lost and lots of energy requirements. So we have introduced a very, very cut through an innovative solution there with pantographs that can top up the batteries of the buses in less than 6 minutes, which is quite very rapid time to do so, and have supported our operations forward. Now, opportunity charging is almost business as usual. For us, we still have lessons learned that we are gathering, but it's been successfully deployed for a year now. And then on my last slide, you will be happy to hear, we are also trialing hydrogen fuel cell buses in Perivale. We have 20 ride bus hydroliners running there. We also had lots of lessons to learn, but as it has been mentioned across the previous discussions and the previous speakers, there is not one solution fitting all. We have to take into account everything that we have. Hydrogen will have its role, we see that, and we're trying to make most of our learnings to see where it's best deployed and how to make the transition as smooth as possible for the operators that want to take that forward. I think I will stop there. I'm very cautious of time, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion that will follow. I think everything lies in collaboration and innovation across all of us.
Thank you, Marina. And really interesting to hear about the innovation as well that you've talked about there, that the opportunity charging is, it feels like that's a real step, a real step towards, I think, being, again, this pragmatism about how is this going to work in practice. And interesting to hear about the hydrogen fuel cell buses as well coming into practice. I wondered, just a quick question for you before we move into the Q&A. And it's possibly a tricky one to answer, but what's the kind of public reaction you're seeing to zero emission buses? Is that something you've been close to or you could comment on?
Yeah, of course. And to be fair, it's one of the easiest questions that you could ask me, Nick. I'm grateful for that. Thankfully, we've seen great response from the public. They are all welcoming very much, or at least most of the public is welcoming very much this transition. They can see the difference it makes in terms of air quality local levels, and they are probing more and more questions for the full deployment. But of course, we're not taking this as granted. We are having continuous engagement and consultations with local areas, the boroughs, everyone involved to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time. That's a good news story for us.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And it's really positive. I'll invite our other panelists to join us now as we move into the Q&A session, and we've received lots of questions. I'm glad to see Chris has rejoined us as well, so thank you, Chris. Hopefully we'll have Faizan and Ian as well. That's fantastic. We've received quite a few questions, so I'll get stuck into those in the interest of time. And we've touched on a lot, obviously a lot of the questions have been touched on in different ways during your 4 presentations. I think Faizan touched on probably this issue, the most, which is about the opportunities. And so we had a question around what are the main opportunities that we're seeing between the bus and the freight sector for sharing. So sharing infrastructure, sharing knowledge, sharing technology. So I don't know if anyone wanted to have a go at that one, and that could extend to partnerships that we're perhaps seeing, even between different outside of modes, if you like. So Faizan, I don't know if you wanted to come in first just to highlight anything there. You talked about some of the potential sharing of infrastructure earlier, but are there any other kind of cooperation opportunities that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So sharing infrastructure is obviously a major one because we've been charging 10 to 12 meter rigid body vehicles in very large bays with rapid charging infrastructure. And we've got 15 to 20 of these very, very large hubs dotted all around the country. And it's not something we're talking about. We've been doing it for quite a while, even with the HGVs as well. I think another very interesting area to explore is repowering vehicles. So as First Bus, we have an investment in a company called Clean Drive, and there are various other companies who are also in the business of repowering vehicles as well. So when we talk about repowering in terms of a bus, just for everyone's benefit, it is exactly what it sounds like. You're taking an old diesel vehicle, and then normally on a 15-year lifespan for a bus, I know it's a bit different for the trucks, you're looking at an engine replacement at around year 8 or year 9. And so from our perspective, is it not perhaps a better idea to, instead of investing more capex at a year 8 or year 9, why don't you just replace the drivetrain? So we've already got 30 to 40 of these buses in service already, thanks to our partnership with New Power. And now we've also got an arrangement with Clean Drive, who've also got a very good modular system who can also repower buses. But in particular, the same company, they've also got a partnership or a collaboration agreement with Welsh Trucks already, Chris, where they're going to be looking at doing the same thing for trucks. And so all of a sudden, the key thing, what your members are talking about, the upfront cost, a repowered truck could very well be part of that solution as well.
Shall I come in at this point?
Please do, yes.
No, I completely agree with all the points you just made there, Faizan. And there's huge opportunities for the haulage industry. I was able to listen in. Forgive me, I've had to change locations in the meantime, but I was able to listen in. And yeah, absolutely. Let's not reinvent wheels here. There's lots of learning that we can take from the bus sector. And all your points you've made there about shared charging opportunities, absolutely. Repowering opportunities, yes, absolutely. The technology is there to allow it to happen. I think would just say one crucial difference, of course, between the haulage and the bus sector is the financing behind this. At the moment, the haulage side is subject to commercial finance as opposed to public funding, and that is a challenge. That is a big challenge, and of course, I'm very aware of Ian's interest here. And again, Ian's case, very legitimate case, to help ease that transition for the hauliers who are subject to commercial finance, a commercial finance operation. So I think my point therefore is this: yes, lots of learning, lots of things that we at the RHA would encourage our members to do, to look at that shared charging. How we just overcome the commercial financing conundrum remains a challenge. What I would say is that for the likes of Ian and for other entities who have solutions, we need to get you in front of the industry as much as we can now, because it will be horses for courses at the moment. There will be solutions for the haulage industry that work, but let's not kid ourselves. There is no silver bullet solution that works for all, and so therefore it's about feeling our way through what works, promoting what works, encouraging that to happen, and we will then progress that way. So hope that makes some sense. Lots of learning, but still that thorny issue, the commercial finance side, and how we overcome that.
Absolutely, thanks, Chris. We've heard quite a lot in Chris, your presentation earlier, and then Ian picked this up later around some of the barriers in terms of vehicle performance, skills, the TCO kind of debate, and the modelling around that. There's quite a few questions that have come in around how the charging infrastructure is going to change to meet the demands for freight and bus as well. But I know that's quite a deep question, and we've all kind of touched on it, but I don't know, Ian, if that's something that you've got any views on. I'm also interested in your thoughts, everyone's thoughts on the skills piece here, going back to Faizan's comment about change management. So could we start perhaps with just something on the infrastructure scaling, and then perhaps a little bit on the skills and change management piece?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a world of difference between somebody putting in 7 kilowatt, 22 kilowatt, AC charging, and actually moving to a proper commercial installation on a DC-based system. Now, we've installed AC. We installed AC at the Coventry site, which charges 130 buses. I think it's fairly common knowledge now that I think that they would prefer to be on a DC-based system, and most of the bus operations that we've looked at now are DC. All of the commercial vehicle operations that we look at are DC because it gives us that faster charging rate. We have to accommodate these very large scale batteries on vehicles and be able to recharge them fast enough so that we can maintain vehicle uptime. The vehicle is only earning when it's out on the road. So with that in mind, the charging infrastructure will change. It has to be higher power. Coventry, for example, I think is about 4 megawatts with a 1 megawatt battery storage solution. We're now looking at, okay, how do we maximize each grid connection in a commercial vehicle site to be able to use software to optimize the charging level. But you are looking at eventually megawatt charging coming in. But I think that the misconception sometimes with megawatt charging is always everything is going to charge at megawatt. No, not everything will charge at megawatt. You can adjust the ratio on the charger so that it could charge at 220, 400, 600, whatever is the right rate to work within the grid constraint that you've got. But I think that is coming. In the meantime, we've got CCS. We're installing 480 kilowatt chargers in a site at the moment. We've got numerous other operations that are all DC. Our main focus is how do we get the power to the site? And that's the most important thing. A lot of these depots are in locations where they've not had to cross the power bridge before. I think the bus depots typically have better access to power because they're in urban conurbations. Some of the depots that we were dealing with in commercial vehicles are that much further out. So we have to come up with creative solutions to circumvent some of the delays that are in the grid supply network. Well, we can do that, or we look at battery storage to try and optimize what we can do for those particular locations.
Is it okay if I come on this,
Please,
Nick?
please do, yes.
Just to back up what Ian was saying, and of course, Ian, you are the expert on this industry. What I could share from the buses world and what we are seeing more and more with operators is, and something that probably the freight industry could avoid as you're starting, is this overestimation of the power needed at each side. Of course, everyone is facing the same range anxiety, and it's very absolutely understandable. But something that we could potentially share is that most of the sites tend to overestimate what they're going to need at the end of the day. And there are several solutions coming from yourselves and other parts of the industry, supporting with load management, supporting with better understanding. So probably that might be one of the main pieces, or one of the things that might be focusing in both worlds.
No, thank you, Marina. Faizan, please come in.
I'm sure there's so much to say on this. I think, are we talking about charging infrastructure or power, or should I just pick what I think is perhaps the most
Please pick what you think best for you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I mean, at First Bus, we've got a very large estate. We've got 60 to 70 depots across the board. So if anyone's in a very similar situation as well, I would heavily encourage you consider advanced power procurement for depots, even which may be 3 or 4 years out, because that is what we've done as well. So even though we've electrified already 15 or 20 depots, we've already got power secured sufficient for full electrification of the depot for over 30 bus depots as well. And so then, because what typically happens is you want to electrify your fleet, you think of the vehicle first, then you think of charging, and then power is a distant afterthought. Whereas I think those of us who've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, it should really be the other way around. The first thing you need to think about is your power requirements, securing those, then you think about infrastructure, and then that's when the vehicle comes in as well. And no, it has never ever happened for us that vehicles have arrived before the infrastructure was ready. No, that's never ever happened. No, yeah. I think inevitably anyone who's been in electrification, they have had to deal with all of those logistics of potentially, oh well, how do we kind of do this jigsaw puzzle of, oh, it's not quite ready over there, but those deliveries are coming there. And so I think one way is just learn from others and sort the power out first.
Understood. And on the change management piece and thinking about skills as well, I mean, the skills gap is something that we're seeing in any industry that's decarbonizing, I think, and even, looking at the, looking at the car market, looking at aerospace, looking at maritime, there's a lot of new skills would be needed to support that transition. But I'm interested in, that the point that's been pulled out about skills as something that will slow down the transition. Chris, is there any views you have on that from speaking to your members, and what's being put in place to kind of mitigate that issue in a way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting issue about skills. On the one hand, I'm reasonably optimistic, actually, that in terms of the training provision that's necessary, that is being put in place. And we talk to the skills providers, we talk to the OEMs. They are updating their training programs to accommodate maintenance, for example, of the new vehicles. And so in a sense, in one sense, we're just happy to let that run. Obviously, we keep a watching brief to make sure that there is that skills uptake, and the people are actually being trained. Where I think there is an issue is for the training colleges and their ability to get their hands on actual zero emission engines, be it electric or hydrogen. There's a potential funding issue there as to whether the colleges can get their hands on it. Again, that's a watching brief that we're monitoring, and it's in due course maybe something that we have to lobby for to ensure that there is that funding provision, as I say, for the colleges, so that they can train their students, on these vehicles in due course. That's my summary at the moment of the skills side of things.
Thank you, Chris. Now, it wouldn't be a BSI webinar if I wasn't asking a question about standards, but luckily someone else has asked a question about standards that wasn't me. So, yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the importance of things like fire safety management and depot design already, but I'm interested in the panel's views on if there's other priorities for standards, and this could be domestic or international standards. Thinking about the need for harmonisation internationally or in Europe, and it could be within a mode or shared across modes. But I'm interested in if there's anything beyond what we've touched on today. What other things that it's going to be really hard to do or do well without standardisation in terms of supporting that transition? And it may even be, Faizan, something we've touched on here is there opportunities to adapt standards from HGVs into bus or vice versa? So I don't know if there's anyone who'd like to kick us off with that one.
I'll have a go. I think, broadly speaking, the major standard issue that I can potentially foresee is if you have third parties coming onto sites, what's the health and safety rules and the standards that they have to apply when they come onto site? We want to standardize it. We want to make it as simple as possible for operators to use bus depots or to use access to other operators' sites. Clearly, this is something that ZHID is promoting, but I think we're all conscious that there are different standards on site, different qualifications about, do you need to reverse park? Do you need access via security? Do you need somebody on watch? All of these sort of things have to be covered off so that from an operator's point of view, from Chris's membership's point of view, they all know if they turn up on site, they sign in, they have PPE, they follow the route to the charger, they reverse park, they plug the charger in, they stay in the vehicle. When they've completed, they unplug, they drive out, that's it. And they've got a tap-in card to record how much electricity they've used. It doesn't need a lot of work, but it does need some sort of process and some sort of standard so that we all know that it adheres to that standard and therefore we can adopt that.
Common protocols, yeah. Chris, please come in.
Yeah, well, just coming on the back of that, completely agree, Ian. It's about the third party access, as you've said, and not letting myths, I think, or gold plating of perceived health and safety issues get in the way of this. And that's a watching brief again that we have, particularly on ZHID, how the ZHID trials go and how operators are able to access that. But equally, any operator beyond ZHID or Project Jolt, who are doing this, will watch to see to make sure there's no obviously health and safety is important, but it's applied appropriately and in a way that helps facilitate things rather than provides an obstacle. Just on the issue of standards, though, one thing that I hope I'm up to date on, there was a big issue about kind of which side the socket, as it were, for the lorry should be. Was it left or right? And that has implications for the design of charging points. And so some kind of standardization there, but also the ability, to go into Europe and to make sure that, there are standard sockets, in charging facilities across the continent matters. So those are the immediate issues that certainly focus my mind, that what we're keeping a watching brief on to make sure, this is seamless. We have no unintended obstacles getting in the way.
Thanks, Chris. And Marina Faizan, from the bus perspective, really interested to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we can make that fairly easy, Chris. Our standard is it should be on both sides. So then you have options, and in some instances, with the right software configuration, you can actually dual charge as well. So for instance, some of our buses, you can take 150 kilowatts on each side, and then you've got 300 kilowatts. And then it's actually, I mean, it's a really important point, because if you do have charging sockets on both sides, it gives you much, much more flexibility on depot design as well. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Marina.
Well, that's
Well, I was
okay.
going to say, very, very quickly, and I guess we look to the OEMs, obviously, to design their vehicles accordingly with that in mind. Sorry, Marina.
No, that's okay. And I think that's a very important point and a very easy, quick win, probably, between the two sectors. So yeah, I did mention fire safety before, Nick, and I know that we have been having discussions, and also around hydrogen refueling. We are having smooth operations at the moment, but there's so much work having been done in different sectors, aviation, trucks, etc., around that. It would be a shame to just reinvent the wheel. Whether we can transfer standards across industries, that's always a big, big win. And we just saw it happening between Faizan and Chris just now. So there's so much collaboration that can happen. So I will just leave it there in terms of time. But I'm sure there are several things that we can take from each other and work better.
No, and as you say, we're seeing as BSI with the decarbonisation in areas like maritime, the maritime sector looking at car charging standards for electric vessels, and charging and water don't always go that well together. So we're going to have to look at how the standards are adapted for the environment. But as you say, it's not starting from scratch, Marina, because there's good stuff out there. A final question then that's really around innovation. I think, Marina, you touched on this already a little bit, but I'm just interested in, we've talked about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities, but what do we think are some of the new kind of services or opportunity operating models that decarbonisation might unlock? So I'm thinking about, nighttime deliveries or low noise, opportunities to balance demand on the grid with HGVs and buses charging it kind of in sync and things like that. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on around the opportunity here. Will there be new services emerging? Ian, is that something you can come in on?
Yeah, I think very briefly, I'm conscious of time, but yeah, we're already seeing this where factories can operate with zero emission vehicles on a much greater range of timings. So where they're close to residential areas, rather than having to shut down, they can actually get another 4 or 5 hours in. That's potentially useful. So I think that's one of the key things that we're taking away, the operational flexibility it provides.
Could I come in very, very quickly? I completely agree that there's opportunities. I think there's an education piece, though, with local authorities. Now, I know TfL do not own the London Lorry Control Scheme. That's an issue that's owned by and operated by the London councils. But, and sorry, this is a campaign point from the RHA, and I know from others, that we really do think the London Lorry Control Scheme needs to be looked at again. So that lorries are not unnecessarily restricted. The technology's come a long, long way since the London Lorry Control Scheme was first introduced. Where diesel lorries were noisy, but we're looking at zero emission now, where they're very, very quiet. So I think there's an opportunity to look again at some of the regulations for urban delivery, and I look forward to taking that conversation, I think, with the London councils in particular. Going forwards.
That's a very good point. I won't answer on that one, Chris. I will just mention that by working together, we can better manage the grid requirements. So you don't have to go and ask 2 MVA for a site for road haulage and then 4 MVA for buses. Let's see how we can probably balance that. And I can see Faizan is smiling on that. I don't know whether you want to come in or not, Faizan.
I think we've made that particular point on sharing power and infra. I think just in terms of innovation, one final comment would be like one very live project we're doing right now. We're now a mature operator, lots of zero emission vehicles. We've decided, we can in-house some of the maintenance, not just of the vehicles, but also of our charging infrastructure, which then means we're saving on some costs. We're working collaboratively with the OEM of the charging infrastructure. And then if anything goes down, we're able to resolve it ourselves. I mean, you can think bigger about that. Well, why stop at our own charging infrastructure. Now that we've got ourselves trained up, we're all over the country. Why not offer that as a service to OEMs to say, well, we can go maintain other infrastructure, potentially even AC charging infrastructure, etc. So the world's your oyster. You just got to really think about these opportunities.
You got my motto there, Faizan.
And I know we could keep talking about this for a long time because there's lots more questions and there's lots there's just so much we could cover really, but we'll close there. And if this was a live face-to-face panel session, I'd ask the audience to kind of thank the panel in the usual manner of clapping, but we're not able to do that, so it's a kind of virtual applause today. But I'd like to thank all our panelists for what's been a really fantastic session. And I'm determined to end on time, so we're only shortly over. What I would just say in the closing remarks is that, BSI's role here really as the UK's national standards body is looking at where standardisation is needed to support the transition to zero emission vehicles, to a more sustainable transport system. And we do that with the help of lots of volunteers who sit on our technical committees and who feed their time and contributions into standards, which we're really grateful for. And really standardization, where we want to put our focus is understanding how we can help to solve problems and create some of the opportunities and unlock some of those opportunities. So today's already started to tease out a few of those. We're still involved in some of the projects and programs we've mentioned today. The ZHID standards we've touched on, for instance, are out there in the public domain. You can go and access that good practice for free as well. They've been supported by Connected Places Catapult and see our work with DFT and Innovate UK. The other thing I need to say, just again for kind of housekeeping, is that all the slides that have been presented today will be shared with attendees, and attendees will also receive a link to the recording of the webinar if you need to go back over anything that was discussed today. I'm sure our panelists won't mind if you want to connect with them on LinkedIn or any of the other usual channels to ask any follow-up questions. You'll find them there, I'm sure. There's a list of other events we're running. Some of these are happening tomorrow around our Net Zero Week. And as I said, you can reach out to us if you've got any more questions. We did receive a few questions we didn't get to today, so I might have a chat offline with our panelists about whether we can go back to any of those with a kind of FAQ, or think about how we could field them in a future session perhaps. But at that point, I'll wrap up and leave it there, and just let's say again, thanks for joining, and a big thanks to our 4 panelists. Much appreciated. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.